Thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. It is the first day of October 2017, barely 25 days to the repeat presidential election set for the 26th of this month. We're here to dissect the biggest political and governance issues for the next 2 hours, taking a look what has been happening the last 1 week and looking forward to what Kenyans can expect from the political circles in the next 1 week. Of course, the biggest story, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission facing its sternest test. Of course, very massive next few weeks for the Electoral Commission as they seek to prepare for the repeat presidential election under massive pressure from both sides of the political divide. The newest thing, of course, is the proposed amendments to the electoral law, something that NASA is opposed to. They have accused the Jubilee administration of introducing or seeking to change the rules of the game during the game itself, criticizing the Jubilee side of trying to mutilate the Constitution during an election time, saying that is not true. Jubilee, on the other hand, say they will do anything, to make sure the election, whatever happens on the 26th of October, is not invalidated without a good reason. So we'll talk about all that and, of course, what happens for the IEBC. Some of those what they call irreducible minimum demands, that is NASA, some of them have been rejected by the IEBC. We shall be outlining some of those. Al Ghurair has been contracted to print ballot papers. That is something NASA did not want. We see OT Morpho is also the company, the French company, that will be offering the technology to the IEBC. And of course, some officials that NASA wanted out of office, including the CEO of the commission, Ezra Chiloba, are still in office. So what gives? NASA insists they will go back to the streets Monday and Friday, twice a week. Jubilee say they will not let NASA derail this country.
Enough is enough. And Monday will begin the demonstrations, and they will be held on Mondays and on Fridays from next week.
We are properly prepared as Jubilee for even a situation where they will not participate in the elections, or where they will want to cause violence so that the election cannot take place, or where they want to go to court to stop the elections from taking place. We are prepared for all the scenarios.
But none of that paperwork has been processed.
Right. Let's take a look at what's happening in the newspapers this morning. And joining me in studio to help me dissect these issues for the next 2 hours, political strategist Brian Mbugua. I have Member of Parliament for Nyando constituency in the county of Kisumu, Jared Okello. I have with me political strategist Mutinda Kavemba and political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining me on the show this morning. Let's take a look at some of the big stories in the main newspapers in this country. And on the Sunday Standard, something that I just touched in a bit there. Tough choices after Raila poll term snapped. What next? The country on tenterhooks of an impasse as it emerges that out of the 12 items in NASA's irreducible minimums list, 5 have been rejected, 3 partially agreed, and 2 and 4 are pending. We'll talk about this in detail, but Jared, what is your take on this? I mean, Al Ghurair is still printing the ballot papers. OT Morpho is still providing IEBC with the technology, and Safaricom still, IEBC will still use Safaricom, networks to do to transmit results, and Chiloba is still in office.
Well, thank you, Ben, and good morning to my colleagues here. Firstly, Ben, allow me to delve into an issue that did take a lot of headlines in the recent past, and this regards to the brutal and senseless attack on the University of Nairobi students by Jubilee GSU wing of the police.
Is it Jubilee or is it the GSU?
It's Jubilee.
All right.
So, I mean, getting into the university lecture halls and fishing out students from their halls of residence to beat them up and clobber them senselessly using those ugly big batons is contrary to the doctrinal values of our Constitution, the Edict of Human Rights, and must be condemned very forcefully by all Kenyans of goodwill. You know, it was totally needless for the police to act in such a manner. Right. Even if, and I want to assume, that they were demonstrating, as they would want us to believe, there is no law that allows the police to declare war with peaceful demonstrators. So we hope that IPOA, that has been given the mandate to seize the moment, will come up with its findings. Right. And those who were party to that undertaking, together with those who gave out the orders, must be brought to book. Now, we still maintain that our irreducible minimums have not been renegotiated. They still remain as they were. All those 12 demands are in sync with what would therefore present a credible election. You know very well, Ben, that when the Supreme Court did nullify the election, right, it touched on certain fundamental transgressions in the electoral merchandise. And they did mention that certain illegalities were perpetuated by the officials of IEBC. Now, we have got two divides here working at the same time. You have Jubilee that has therefore finally come to the reality that indeed those transgressions ought not to have taken place. And for them, the cure simply means that those transgressions can be now made into statutes, be different pieces of legislation, right, that even if they will be repeated by the same IEBC, then they will not qualify to vitiate an election, a presidential election. So they have finally come to terms with that reality. All right. And that is why their top voices concerning castigations on what the Chief Justice did have recently simmered. So we'll get into the details of these, some of these demands, the ones that have been rejected, the ones that have partial concessions, and the pending demands. But what next? What next begins tomorrow. We have countrywide peaceful protests in line with Article 37 of the Constitution. We want Kenya to go into an election that will not once again be subjected to another round of petition. We have, as a country, lost so much within this period of time that we will not allow Jubilee to go around perpetuating their ills and hence put the country into this quagmire. I did say here last weekend that from the Nairobi Stock Exchange alone, they have, posted that well over 400 billion shillings have since been lost. Right. And you know of many countries that have also instituted travel advisories on their people coming to Kenya. And this is a country that relies very heavily on tourism. All right. So we will not allow Jubilee. Jubilee would accuse you of being the one that have made the Kenyan economy to stagnate because of the of the protest. But that's a story for another day. Mutinda, how do you think IEBC have dealt very quickly with this, the reducible minimum demands by NASA?
I think IEBC is doing well because we have an election on the 26th and they've got to do what they have to do for them to ensure that we conduct that election as per the judgment and ruling of the Supreme Court. And it is not really about the irreducible minimums because, you can give conditions which also happen to be in tandem with what they had decided to do internally. Because, you see, the problem is that we actually didn't give them time to do an internal audit and come up with recommendations. Because if probably they'd been given such time, they would have come up with some of the things. And in my opinion, what they've done is that they've done what they think they should do as IEBC. Right. And coincidentally, it happens to be in tandem with some of the conditions given by NASA, but not necessarily, it is not a must that they did that because the conditions were given by NASA. I would want to look at it because if they decide pulling depending on the protagonists in this, they might get lost. They should remember that they are an independent commission, and they should do an internal audit, which I think they've already done, which is guiding whatever actions they are now taking, and stick to that for as long as they are sure those are the things they need to do to have a credible election as envisaged in our constitution and as per the guidelines of the Supreme Court. There's something that Mheshimiwa has mentioned here that should not be let to go. Because one thing that you have to give Jubilee credit to is that they've stuck to the law. That everything they are doing is very clear and it is allowed for in the Constitution. The people who are causing uncertainty that might be leading to even what is talking about other countries giving travel advisories are NASA. Because NASA are even envisaging strategies that are not captured in the Constitution. Because when they stand and tell us that we will have no election, the Constitution does not envisage such a situation. And those are the things that are sending the wrong signals to the international community, that is even making them get worried. Because stability is about having rules that guide your doing stuff, such that even when other visitors are coming here, they know that there will be no extremes. But the signals that have been sent by NASA are such that no one can be sure, especially those from outside this country, what will happen after the 26th, especially going by the repeated public pronunciations by the NASA leaders regarding the repeat election of the 26th.
We'll get into those details very shortly. Dismas, from where you sit, is it okay for the Electoral Commission to not implement all the demands that NASA had?
Ben, allow me to associate myself with the remarks by Honorable Jared Okello. I'm an interested party at the University of Nairobi.
All right.
My brother is a teacher there, and I've got a niece who is a student. So when you see those acts of brutality by the Kenyan police service, it's unacceptable. And one would hope that Mr. Okello, when he gets that opportunity to go to the National Assembly, can actually bring a motion to discuss the conduct of the relevant officers. Because the photos that we saw, the footage, when you see a policeman with a baton beating up girls, making them a frog march, it reminds you of pictures you only see in the Middle East when there's a crisis in Afghanistan. That's not the kind of footage you expect in Kenya. Even if those girls were guilty, the policemen have no rights to instill any punishment, brutal punishment as it was. So I'm really hoping that outside the power, even the Inspector General of Police himself is going to move with speed. Because a number of the students understand their nursing injuries at Kenyatta National Hospital, which again raises another question, whether or not you've got nurses working to take care of those conditions. So that's something that I would expect that Honorable Okello is going to have high in the priority list. But coming back to IBC, IBC is not supposed to be responding to Jubilee. IBC is not supposed to be responding to NASA. IBC is supposed to be doing the right thing. The right thing has already been pronounced by the Supreme Court, that there were illegalities and there were irregularities. So as IBC done a special audit to establish the illegalities, irregularities, have they done public consultation so that we understand what challenges they've been facing in the past and how they intend to make progress? But the biggest issue, in my view, is that a number of officers have been suspected to have played to some cartels and ensured that this election was not free, was not fair, nor was it credible. Those are the officers who are supposed to step aside or resign. And you know, NASA has given a number of names, and Jubilee has given a number of names. And the names given include Mr. Chiloba, there is Mr. Mohati, and there is Immaculate Kasais. Now, when the entire nation is casting aspersions on your integrity or ability to deliver a free, fair, credible election, why would you want to push the nation into a quagmire, knowing very well that if you step aside, you are not going to be fired? You can decide to take a 3-month leave and then allow Mr. Chebukati to sanitize the situation. Because if those are key officers, especially the 3 so mentioned, if they do not take a walk, Mr. Raila Odinga has indicated in black and white that NASA is not going to participate in this election. If NASA does not participate in this election, then we get into uncharted territories. We'll have people from Jubilee saying that President Kenyatta is going to be in office till he hands over to another person or he hands over to himself if he gets re-elected. And then you'll have NASA saying that this situation calls for a caretaker administration. Let's have Justin Muturi taking over. Then now we'll get into a serious constitutional crisis.
All right.
And I'm wondering why we don't have a few Kenyans of goodwill the voice of reason, people with a backbone, who can come up and look at both President Kenyatta and Mr. Raila Odinga in the eye and tell them they're holding the country hostage and they're creating unnecessary tensions. And at this stage, one has to commend the Anglican Church for coming out bravely. This is the very first time that the church in Kenya is coming out to stamp its authority. One would expect that Cardinal Njue is going to follow suit. The members of the business community, you have KEPSA, which most of the time behaves like it's a special unit of Jubilee. They need to come out and state their position. Manufacturers, hawkers, every person of Kenya, because we cannot sit back and allow two gentlemen to hold us hostage for all this time.
All right. Brian, how is your take? What is your take on the conduct of IEBC during this time? How it has handled both NASA and Jubilee?
First of all, I'll say what Kenya wants is an election on the 26th. Kenyans are tired of this political push and pull. And IEBC, as Mutinda has said, is an independent institution. And whatever NASA is suggesting is something administrative. The issue of tenders, the Supreme Court did not indict Al Ghurair. The Supreme Court did not indict Mofo. And in fact, the most mentioned person in the Supreme Court is the chairman himself, who is not part of the irreducible minimum by NASA. So NASA are not being genuine in this. We've seen them before. The former commission had to go with a full package because they were protected by law. And even NASA know if they follow the law, they will not be able to remove those people who want to be removed in office. That's why they are using other means. So, to me, the irreducible minimums of NASA died the moment Supreme Court released its full judgment, because it did not indict anyone on the issue of illegalities. In that ruling, I have not seen even one. What I've seen is those issues of form, stamps, signatures. There's nothing that went against the written rule unless they pinpointed to me. So those demands, they are not genuine demands, right, and they are not reasonable demands, and they should let IEBC do their work. If they will not be satisfied, they have the same courts to go back to, but they let IEBC do their work.
All right, we'll get into the IEBC discussion very shortly. Very quickly to some more stories in the Sunday Standard. Lawyer goes after Justice Njoki Ndung'u, that is Apollo Mboya, who has filed a petition before the Judicial Service Commission seeking to oust Supreme Court judge of allegations of misconduct in a dissent in the Maraga presidential judgment. What are views on this, Dismas? Very quickly.
Well, it would be interesting. We've got a Judicial Service Commission, and any Kenyan who thinks any judge, even a magistrate, anybody working within the judiciary, is not defending the public interest and is not respecting the Constitution, you are invited to make a petition. Anybody in Kenya, it could even be a villager in Kisii or in Nyamira or in Kitui.
So there's no story there.
If you suspect that there is any mischief, present your petition. The Judicial Service Commission has got the capacity to look at all petitions and take a decision whether or not it merits any sort of action. Maybe what we need to do now is to come up with maybe we need to come up with a piece of legislation, and this would be for Honorable Okello, so that you punish people who come with frivolous petitions. Because you're not going to keep the Judicial Service Commission busy with guys off the streets. Somebody's in Aba is having a conversation, doesn't like, say, Justice Njoki Ndung'u, you come up with a petition. You are in a bar, you don't like Justice Lenaola, you come up with a petition and accusing him of all manner of ills. Maybe we just need to structure an administrative way so as to make sure that nobody goes to the Judicial Service Commission with frivolous issues. Like, for instance, for Justice Ndung'u, people have raised a number of accusations, and it would be interesting to establish whether or not, in fact, is the case. Because accusations are all over. There are claims that she did not give her dissent judgments. She did not give the other colleagues the opportunity to review it. Because I understand it's a best practice all over, especially in the Supreme Court, that if you're going to have a different view, then the majority judges need to have the opportunity to look at what you are writing. And the people are saying that in established Supreme Courts, like in the UK, in the US, you do not attack the personalities of the other judges. You attack the merits and demerits. So there are all these manner of accusations which need to be investigated by an independent organization so that we establish whether or not they followed best practices.
All right. Mutinda, any meat, any substance to that petition against Judge
No, not any I've seen, and I think we would just know that it is his right, and it is right of every Kenyan to do that. I think it is upon the JSC to look upon the merits and see whatever Dismas is talking about is actually what not all petitions are admitted. Some are just dismissed from from the onset. So the JSC is up to the task. They are going to look at the issues, and if at all there are any issues, then the due process will follow. And if there are no issues, then the whole thing will be dismissed. I think that is the position, because we have to give these institutions their room to do their job. And some of these things are always, I look at them as tests to our institutions, so that if something has merit, then it is processed with due process. If it does not have it, then it is dismissed. I think, yeah, if need be, with cost. That probably is enough to make sure you don't just bring trivial matters there, the element of dismissing with cost. So I think we leave that to the Judicial Service Commission, so that they, in their own wisdom, they tell us whether there is any merit. And if there isn't, then they do away with the petition.
Jared, we did see petitions against the 4 judges who had the majority vote, the CJ and the other judges. Now we're seeing also the dissenting judges having petitions against them. What is your initial reaction?
Well, just as my colleagues have said, it is within their constitutional right to do so for any person who would want to present a petition before any government agency. And that is what Article 37 of the Kenya's Constitution pays much credence to. We are aware that immediately upon the verdict rendered by the Supreme Court, Nyeri Town Member of Parliament, Honorable Ngunjiri, did file a petition harshly indicting the Chief Justice, Honorable David Maraga. Of course, as much as it was meant to achieve certain political objectives, the president, having realized how that impacted his campaigns negatively in Kisii land or within the Abagusi community, did advise him to go and withdraw that petition. Of course, that has not been done to date. So whether the president meant what he said, or it was an extension of another political expediency, we are yet to know. But, you know, it is within Ngunjiri's rights to do so, both democratic and constitutional. And we await to see any kind of evidence that he will adduce before the JSC in regards to that petition. Additionally, 2 other petitions have been filed. One touching on the conduct of Justice Mwilu, and the other touching on Justice Isaac Lenaola. And what they actually captured was some telephone conversation between the judges and other external parties who were not actually parties to the petition, the presidential petition that was filed by Right Honorable Raila Amolo Odinga. So, of course, many questions will then come into place. For instance, how did somebody get access to a telephone communication without a court order? How did Safaricom, if at all, as has been alleged, give out such information without paying attention to rights, to privacy, and many other things? So, but again, Justice Njoki Ndung'u, in regards to Apollo Mboya's petition, is not a new phenomenon, it's not a new thing. This was filed many years back when there was a ghost law in court. At some point, Justice Ndung'u, Justice Ojwang, and a few others refused to take up their cardinal responsibilities as is espoused in the Constitution in court.
All right.
And Justice Mboya therefore said that in light of what would be, you know, doctrines touching on conduct of judges and even labor laws, they were not in sync with those kind of deliberations. So a petition was filed, and you know the former Chief Justice, Honorable Mutunga, has also filed a rebuttal and has categorically highlighted areas where he thinks that Justice Njoki Ndung'u did transgress on her line of duty.
So there was that all, these are new one about alleged misconduct during that Supreme Court ruling.
But that is an additional. That is an additional to what has been there before, filed by the same.
Right.
But again, you know, Njoki's judgment, for anybody who had time, you know, she took 1 million years reading that 400-page document, but it wasn't based on any cogent law. Much of it was about harsh indictments on her fellow judges, which is contrary to any Supreme Court's verdict all over the world. When you are given an evidence adduced before you as a judge, and the submissions have been presented by various parties, you restrict yourself to just the evidence and the submissions. But she went extra, you know, extra considerations by dragging in names of fellow judges, their conduct, their affairs. That is not how judgments are written. And you ask yourself, Njoki Ndung'u had time to write a 400-page judgment by herself, harshly indicting her fellow. You know, these are things that we will come to know as we go along.
What are you insinuating? But Brian, you've held the opinion that even the judges of the Supreme Court are not demigods. They can be criticized. What is your take on Njoki Ndung'u's the petition against her?
First of all, I'd like to say Dismas was misleading the viewers that dissenting judges give their judgment to the majority. It's the other way around. The majority must give the dissenting judges their ruling for them to dissect. So it was Njoki was within her right to do what she did. What I'll say about the petition is JSC, as it's constituted, has 4 petitions before them, touching on different judges. And JSC itself, it's not a court. It does not need proof beyond reasonable doubt. It just have to establish the grounds. If, for example, there was improper contact between the justices and party to the petition, that enough is ground enough for them to constitute a tribunal. You know, they've done it before in the case of Nancy Baraza. And in a court of law, it will have been difficult to indict Baraza on the same. But for JSC, for them is to establish the minimum. You know, what Jared has said is it's as if the justices are admitting that there was improper contact. That's why they're trying to sue even Safaricom for releasing the details. But I can tell you, it's not only Safaricom that can give you those contacts. There are people who can fish this thing. Whether it's right thing to do or wrong thing to do. No, the problem is, we Kenyans, we want the truth. We want to find out, was there contact between the judges and we don't care how they came up with those things.
On the same breath, when we look for the truth in the servers,
we want the truth. All we are seeking is the truth. Even on Justice Njoki ruling, he said the other judges were lazy. They did not go through the forms before them. And until the registrar report and Njoki ruling are reconciled, we need to find out the truth. Right. One of them must be lying. Right. So we need to find the truth. Who's behind it?
Yes, this must have been mentioned adversely.
Yeah. and since I can defend myself, I've had the opportunity, the unique opportunity to socialize with High Court judges, Court of Appeal, and Supreme Court, both locally and internationally. And the best practice is, when the Supreme Court is doing a judgment, the judges are allowed to share all their opinions, whether it's in the majority, whether it's concurring, whether you are dissenting. You're supposed to share. There's nothing secret. If you don't like what the majority has said, you don't go lock yourself in a room and you do your judgment, and then you shock them on the material day like any other Kenyan. A number of judges have indicated that you must share so that you look at the issues together. So I'm afraid that what Mr. Mbogwa is indicating, that you're supposed to keep your rulings or opinions secret, that's not a best practice.
I've not said that. I've said it's the duty of the majority to give their judgment to the dissenting for them to write their judgment. Because that's why it's called dissenting. They're disagreeing with the majority. So they have to have the majority ruling for them to disagree with it.
All right.
And they're disagreeing with issues. They're not disagreeing with personalities.
All right. Let's leave it there. Let's leave it there on the This morning's look at the papers, what's happening in the papers. That's where we look at. That's where we leave it. When we return, we shall be taking a look at the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission in its seeming catch-22 situation as they try to conduct that balancing act between Jubilee and NASA and preparations for the October 26 repeat presidential election. Remember, OT Morpho has been given a contract to provide the technology in this repeat presidential election. Al Ghurair, the printing firm, controversial printing firm, has also been given the contract to print the ballot papers. We'll look at all that. NASA says they will go back to the streets Monday and Friday.